Okay, let's try this again. I've for some reason been cursed trying to make this video. This is like attempt number 5. I've had sound issues. I've had saving issues. I did a video that just disappeared when I tried to save it to Google Drive. I am trying to put together a little discussion for y'all about group presentations. So for those of you who I'm currently in the class, hey, it's Donovan, the friendly floater guy. And if you're in a subsequent class, if Mosen is using this video down the line, then hi, my name is Donovan Conley. I'm a professor in the Department of Communication Studies, and I've been sitting in the food and beverage capstone class just out of personal curiosity, trying to learn some things and have some fun. And as I mentioned, I'm a communication studies faculty member, and I've been, researching and teaching and writing about message craft, message reception for my entire career. I've taught countless sections of public speaking, and I just wanted to share some basic insights with you all. Here's a class that's about food and beverage and the managing of hospitality enterprise, and it's been fantastic, and I've loved it all. And as part of this project, this sort of semester-long project that you're all involved in, you have to do 2 presentations, a pre and a post. And I've just been noticing some things that, where I'm coming from, I might be able to offer some suggestions and advice that could help you with your group presentations, not just in this class, but in subsequent classes or out in the world if you have to give a talk or whatever. So I just have a couple of points that I want to run through with you. Just some things that you would benefit from thinking about and knowing about, and can help you, I think, immensely in your efforts of creating a presentation, whether individually as a group. So the first point, I have 3 points, but the first overarching thing that I want to say is that, it's very evident to me sitting in the class watching these presentations that a lot of effort has gone into the creation of the slide content material, right? There's a lot of information in there, and they've been put together with a lot of care and a lot of skill, and they're visually appealing, and there's a lot of information in there. And so I don't have too much to say about the slides themselves, but I do want to say this, that you can have the most perfect slide presentation in the world, and it's essentially meaningless on its own, right? And so that's where the presentational part kicks in, and that's where my work in rhetoric, which is the ancient art of persuasion, that's where that becomes relevant. All right, so 3 points that I want to run through quickly here with you. And the first point is that the success of a presentation is measured by the audience, okay? It's not very common, I think, for probably students in a food and beverage class when they're putting together a presentation to be thinking at great length about sort of the audience aspect of what you're doing. And watching these presentations, it's pretty clear that some groups are maybe a little bit more inclined to think along those lines, and some have not really thought about it much. But I'm here to tell you that the success of your presentation is almost exclusively determined by the audience. The success comes through the audience, right? And so number 1 point is essentially the audience is everything. And what you're doing here is you are talking to and with a group of people. These are your fellow colleagues, fellow students, but they're also, for the purposes of these presentations, your audience, right? And so you need to connect, and you need to think about them, and they need to be almost the sole thing that you're thinking about when you are conveying this information. You've put a ton of work into your slides. They're brilliant, but as I say, they're essentially dead if you are not thinking about how you're connecting with your audience. So that leads to the second point. First point is the audience is essentially everything in terms of the success of the presentation. And the second point is that you can understand the relationship between the speaker and the audience, or the group speakers and the audience, through Aristotle's, what he called the 3 modes of appeal. And again, this is the ancient art of rhetoric. This is sort of the very beginnings of the theories of persuasion and public reasoning and public argument. And Aristotle's sort of the man in terms of like thinking about how persuasion works. And so he talks about the 3 modes of appeal. And you've probably heard these words before. I'm certain of it. But you might not know so much what they're about. So ethos, pathos, and logos. Those are the 3 modes of appeal. What is a mode of appeal? Well, Aristotle says that these three kind of aspects of a performance are inherently persuasive, and they can, on their own, essentially win over an audience and assure success or move towards success, depending on how they're handled. So ethos is often sort of thought of as like just character, and there's elements of character that are important there. But I think of ethos more as like persona, right? It's sort of how are you coming across? You as the speaker, how are you coming across to your audience? That's super important, right? And Aristotle actually said that of the three modes of appeal, ethos is very likely the single most important, right? Think about speakers that have really connected with you, or that you've connected with, or that you've been moved by, inspired by, right? What qualities do they have? Ethos, Aristotle said, involves the qualities of authority. We tend to believe and are persuaded by those who we believe to be authoritative, knowledgeable, competent. Second one is credibility. We tend to be persuaded by and believe those who we believe to be credible, right? To be, let's say, experienced. It relates to authority, but it's more about kind of trustworthiness, right? And then the last one is sincerity. There's other aspects of character that you can talk about here, but those are three pretty important ones. Authority, credibility, and sincerity. Are you earnest? Do you care? Are you someone that an audience can actually like warm up to, right? So these are all aspects of your persona, your character that come across in your performance and are hugely important in terms of an audience being with you or an audience not being with you, all right? So ethos really matters. You want to come across as, I think for these presentations, as knowledgeable, absolutely, as maybe passionate about what you're doing. This is your restaurant, this is your concept, this is your team, this is your effort, this is your management role. I hope you're excited about it. I hope you're passionate about it. But also, you know, we kind of know each other. There's a little bit of a casualness here. We call the instructor Mosen by his first name. So there's a certain level of kind of familiarity. So you don't need to be super formal here, but you want to be thinking about that ethos, right? And it's about projecting a certain kind of persona that the audience can very easily warm up to, accept, and connect with. The next one is pathos, which usually gets translated as emotion. And it's that, but I would say it's bigger. It's also about values. It's all about inclinations. It's all about things that you care about, your subjective sort of inner landscape, and it's mood. It's about even potentially biases, positive, negative, all the stuff that you are kind of reacting to in an almost unconscious way, right? But we react to fear-based appeals. We react to pride-based appeals. We react to intimidation, we react to humor, we react to, and on and on, okay? So these are all kind of pathos moves. And again, we connect through these very kinds of personal, intimate dynamics that the speaker is able to use, able to tap into, able to coax out, right? And so again, humor, friendliness, professionalism, you know, the shared kind of struggle of putting together a restaurant. These are some of your available pathos kinds of appeals. I'll just pause, briefly mention what Aristotle's definition of rhetoric is the ability to discover the available means of persuasion in a given case, right? So there's always this question of like, what is available to me in this moment, in this presentation? What is available to me to sort of draw on, to use, to incorporate? Can I come in here and do a bunch of swearing and be all like aggressive and edgy? And I don't know if that's available to you in terms of the success of this kind of presentation. So you want to be thinking about what's available. What are your choices? What can you work within, right? What are the constraints, but also what are the opportunities and availabilities? So that's going to get up to this business of invention, which I'll talk about next. So the final mode of appeal is logos. We got ethos, pathos, and logos. Logos is not just logic. It's often thought of as logic. But you can think about it as reason. It gets translated as like the word. I tend to think of it as the kind of the structure and the relationship between your ideas as you're expressing them in language, right? So it's about thought, but it's also about the expression of thought. And it's about, you know, how you're supporting and it's about your substance. It's about your kind of content. When I'm looking up on the screen, I'm seeing lots of data. I'm seeing lots of like numbers and projections, and we've done this research and so on. That's all kind of logo stuff that's helping you to create your pitch, essentially. You know, your pre-presentation is like a pitch about this is what we want to do. This is why we think it's going to be successful. So you're trying to convince your audience that this is a winning concept, right? But it can't just all be logos. It can't just all be like dry technical data. If you're trying to get the audience excited about this, and don't forget, these are your like future employees essentially. So you want them like hooking into this. You want them to care about it. It can't just be pure dry data and words on the screen, right? You got to be like using other modes of appeal, your ethos and your pathos. And so it's always kind of swirling together. So that's the second point. The first point is the success of your presentation is determined by the audience. The second point is that that audience-speaker relationship is structured by Aristotle's 3 modes of appeal: ethos, pathos, logos. Third and final point is that the total presentational performance is governed by what is known as the rhetorical canon, also known as the 5 parts of the art of rhetoric. If you were to pick up any single public speaking textbook, maybe you've taken public speaking, you probably have at your time here. You might have used a Lucas book or a Zarefsky book or our own in-house version that we teach. If you pick up any public speaking textbook going from now back to the time of Aristotle and Plato over 2,500 years ago, you're going to find the same basic topics. And they all kind of get organized around these 5 basic elements of this rhetorical act, right? Anytime we are engaged in rhetoric, some kind of purposive attempt to engage an audience and move them in a certain way or inform them in a certain way, you are using these 5 elements of rhetoric, the canon. What are they? All right, the first one is invention. The second is arrangement. The third is delivery. The fourth is style. And the fifth is memory. Those are the 5 canons. Again, the idea is whenever you're giving a presentation, whether you're aware of it or not, these things are operating. All right, so what's invention? Get back to Aristotle's definition of rhetoric, the ability to discover the available means of persuasion in a given case. So invention is the process of working through those available persuasives. Now you're asking yourselves, or you're saying to the screen, dude, this is not a persuasive speech. This is just a presentation about what we're doing. Well, I would argue anytime you're standing up in front of an audience, you are in fact attempting to persuade them. The speeches that you guys are giving are what we would call an informative speech. It's basically just like, here's what we're doing. And then afterwards, it's here's what happened, right? There's a lot of information here, but you're also selling it. It's persuasive in the sense that you're trying to get your audience to care. You're trying to get them to give a crap. And so there's elements of like, I am trying to awaken you, to excite you. At least there ought to be, right? So the inventional part of this is the process sort of before the performance where you're thinking through all those available persuasives. You're thinking about what's going on in the slides. You're thinking about your persona. You're thinking about your audience, who's in the audience. You're thinking about, do we include a clip from, I just saw this morning, from the gangster movie. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking out. Do I include a clip from Godfather? My goodness, right? Do we include humor? Do we include, is it more serious? Or is this about beauty and elegance, right? Choices, 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 choices. All those little choices that you're making that are going into the slide, of course, the presentation on the screen. But beyond that, the total presentation, the choices that you're making about what you're wearing, the choices you're making about where you're standing, that's all invention, okay? It's the most important part of any given presentation because it's where your ideas are getting kind of sorted through and planned and you're really thinking through what you're going to do. Arrangement typically involves the kind of ordering of your ideas as you present them, right? And so it's like, here's your introduction, and then you transition into your body, and I have 3 main points. You'll notice that I'm trying to make my own arrangement explicit, 3 main points, transitions, repetition, right? That's all pretty standard stuff. By the way, when I'm teaching my own classes, I like to draw on the hospitality world by talking about the sort of that first moment of a presentation. We call that the attention getter. That's like the amuse-bouche of a meal, right? You're just trying to awaken your audience. You're trying to kind of get them, fold them into this moment, get them excited about it, right? So there's lots of interesting overlaps here. So arrangement is about the kind of the flow of your ideas, what follows what comes first, what comes next, and why, and how you're moving through them, and how you're sequencing and arranging things in terms of the flow. I would also challenge you, though, to be thinking beyond the screen. As I said at the beginning, a perfect presentation on the screen is not even half the battle in terms of the success of a presentation. So when you're thinking invention, you also want to be thinking about your actual presentation. Again, how are you standing? What are you wearing? How are you situated in relation to your teammates? How are you projecting? And so on and so on and so on. So we've seen lots of differences in terms of these presentations. We've seen teams sort of arranging themselves in like a V shape up at the front of the classroom. We've seen teams all kind of in a single diagonal, like off to the side. We've seen everyone clustered together. We've seen them spread out. I'm intrigued by all this stuff, and I wonder how much of it's intentional and deliberate. I would challenge you folks, as you're thinking about group presentations or your own presentation, to be thinking about arrangement also in terms of your relation to the like physical, spatial relation to the audience. One of the challenges and kind of frustrations of watching the presentations is when I see all the students just kind of like huddled against the wall around that little podium where the computer is, right? You're so distant from the rest of the class. You're so kind of removed. And then it's hard for us to see you, and it's hard for us to connect to you. Part of ethos, and frankly pathos, is to feel a connection between the speaker and the audience. That means you need to come out more. It means you need to get away from the podium, away from the wall. I know that sometimes it can be a little like intimidating. But if you want to succeed in your presentation, it's really all about that connection, right? And so I want to encourage and challenge presenters, groups to be thinking about the kind of total space in front of your audience. Don't stand off to the side. Don't stand off in the back in the corner, especially when you're wearing dark clothes and there's dark walls. And sometimes I literally can't even see anyone, right? Then you add masks. And then you add ambient noises like the fan system or planes flying over, and it becomes very challenging to actually hear what anyone is saying. I'm in the front row and I'm trying really hard to like listen closely. And I've been doing this a lot, which is like, hey, can you please speak up a bit? So please be mindful. Again, what's on the screen is important, but it doesn't really matter if it's not being translated and if it's not being mediated by you, the presenters, right? So you really need to be thinking about how this information is being conveyed and how you as the conveyor are doing that job. All right, so we've got invention, and then we've got arrangement. Next, we've got delivery and style, and I usually think of those together because they really have to do with your kind of physical performance, right? So delivery is super important, and this is probably the thing that I would want to talk to the most because we've seen a lot of variance in delivery. And the thing that has been the biggest struggle, again, the masks are just terrible, right? Because we can't see your lips and you're muffled behind these things. And we have a lot of people in the class who talk quietly, normally, and then you add a mask to that and we're toast, right? What makes things even more challenging is when presenters will turn and talk at the screen. And as you can see here, if my back is off, if you're just looking at my back and I'm talking off, you're having a really hard time keeping up, even hearing anything, right? So again, the screen is important, the slides are important, the content on is important, but your job is to not read that to the audience. We're sitting in the audience, we can see what's on the screen, we know what's up there. Turning to the screen, turning your voice away from the screen, turning your face and body away from the audience just means that they're going to start picking up their phones and losing interest, right? So my suggestion and my challenge and my encouragement is to know very, very closely and in great detail what is up there and to talk to the audience about what's on the screen, but not turn and talk to the screen and especially don't read what's on the screen. I mean, that's just death. We just check out. I promise you. And if you're sitting in the audience and you see that happening, you're checking out too, because you're reading twice, essentially. You're having an echo kind of thrust at you. So please be mindful about not just the slides, but how you use the slides and how you work through the slides. And I would encourage everyone, groups, to rehearse, to practice, to think through each slide and who's talking and when you're talking and what you're talking about. And it should be more than just reading the little blurbs or sections or bullet points that are on the screen. I would also challenge you, for the purposes of the presentation, to limit what you put on those slides. Don't put full sentences, put key phrases, just a couple of words, a couple of key words, and then you tell us the rest. So what's going to happen is the people in the audience are going to look up there and then see linen count or something like that. It's like, what's that about? All right, well, you're drawing our attention to the fact that we didn't have enough linens or we had way too many linens or whatever, right? The point is not obviously clear. The audience needs to look at you to get the point. So again, it's not letting the slides do all the labor for you. I know that a lot of work went into the slides, but you've got to then turn around and work with the audience. So delivery is really about the physicality of your presentation. It's about how you're projecting. It's about working through the masks, working through the fans, working through the sounds of airplanes flying over, all the other kind of random stuff that's going on to make sure that your audience can hear you, they can connect with you, they can engage what you're trying to do. It's super important. If you don't have them engaged in listening, then you're toast, right? So the last one's memory. It doesn't factor in too much. It's basically sort of what I was just saying about, like, you should know. You should know what you're talking about so that you can just talk instead of turning and reading. So it's not about just did you memorize your speech, but do you understand and do you have the knowledge and the recall that's necessary in the moment to give the speech in a way that's confident, that's personal, that's in the moment. I've seen some really interesting and good examples. This morning, my man Miro was giving their final group presentation, and I was really impressed by how, when it was his turn to talk, he turned away from the audience, he walked close up to the rest of the group, he pulled his mask down, and he spoke loudly and clearly and directly to the audience with purpose, right? So I challenge everyone to be thinking about the purpose here. Now, it is to inform, but it's to persuade that this information matters, it's relevant, it's useful, it's necessary, right? We've gone through these processes, these planning and preparation and research processes for a reason. These ideas on these slides exist for a reason. So now your job is to get us to see that, to get us to care about it, to get us to understand, and to keep us along for the ride. Whenever I'm teaching a public speaking class and there is a speech happening, I have my little grading sheet, but mostly, you know what I'm doing is I'm looking around the audience. And I can tell the success of a speech by if anyone's paying attention, if they're smiling, if they're nodding, if they're like reacting, versus they're doodling on their page, they're looking at their phone, they're staring off into space, they're playing with their leg or shoe or something like this. You can tell the success of his performance or presentation just mostly by looking at the people around you. Are they engaged? Are they leaning forward? Are they perked up? Are they responding, right? Now, again, I know this is not a class in public speaking, but I promise you that if you think a little bit about these elements, the modes of appeal and the canon, you will do much, much better in terms of planning and preparing and rehearsing and knowing what you're doing and being kind of mindful about how you're coming across. So step away from the wall, step away from the screen, stop reading off of the screen, engage your audience, talk to us, talk with us, convey this information to us in a way that conveys your excitement, that conveys your sense of ownership and pride over what it is you're doing here. That would be my main suggestion. This is getting right about where I want it to be. So the last thing I'll mention is I'm going to also post a reading by the great Wayne Booth. I've been teaching this recently in my own classes. He talks about a rhetorical stance, and he talks about a rhetorical stance involves elements of 3 elements. It's the speaker, it's the message, and it's the audience. And a rhetorical stance needs to be thinking about the relationship between these 3 elements, right? And it's a balance, and that's his point, is that you need to balance the speaker, your role up there, the message on the screen, the role of that, and also the presence of the audience. And he talks about these perversions, and you can have an imbalance if you're overly focused on yourself. He calls that the entertainer's imbalance, right? You can be overly focused on the screen or the message, and that's what he calls the pedantic imbalance, a pedant, right? Someone who's sort of like technical and dry. And to be honest, that's mostly what I've been seeing is an abundance of focus just on the subject, just on the message, at the expense of the audience and at your own ethos, right? So your speaker, audience, and subject. The last imbalance is if you focus too much on the audience, you become an advertiser, right? So Wayne Booth's little reading is quite interesting in terms of how he's asking us to be thinking about any given rhetorical performance, whether it's writing or speaking or whatever, to be thinking about these three elements, to be thinking about your purpose and what you want to achieve here, and then to try to strike that balance. So that's plenty. I could talk endlessly about this kind of stuff, but hopefully that's useful. Please let this video work so that I can post it and that it can be of use. I have had such a great time in this class. I've learned so much. I've had a lot of fun. I just wanted to kind of give back a little bit, and coming from where I'm coming from, hopefully these ideas are useful. And like I said, beyond this class, in your careers, I think these ideas can be useful for you. So enjoy. Thanks, gang.